Would you risk your career, your safety, and your heart for a wild animal everyone else said was a lost cause? If you looked into the eyes of a wounded predator and saw not fear, but a plea for help, what would you do? Stay with this story, because what happens in the pine woods of northern Colorado will challenge everything you thought you knew about trust, compassion, and the meaning of family. The air in northern Colorado had a certain sharpness in late autumn, brisk and clean, with the first whispers of snow hanging in the needles of towering pines. The kind of cold that bit through a person's coat and made the world feel twice as silent, save for the crunch of boots on last year's fallen needles and the distant call of a red-tailed hawk. Dr. Lauren Mitchell was used to these woods. In her early 40s, with streaks of gray already showing at her temples, she'd spent more years tracking wildlife and patching up broken bodies than she cared to count. But on this particular afternoon, as daylight faded toward an icy dusk, something felt different, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Lauren parked her battered green Tacoma just off a rutted logging road, every muscle in her body tensing as she stepped out into the wind. She pulled her old canvas bag over her shoulder, a familiar weight filled with tranquilizers, field dressings, her battered notepad, and walked deeper into the shadows, following a game trail marked by fresh deer prints. She was here to check for illegal snares again. Some ranchers near the mountain town still insisted on old-school pest control, setting wire traps despite new regulations. Usually, her job was to take photos, cut the wire, and shake her head in quiet anger. But today, as she rounded a thick stand of lodgepole pines, she spotted something at the edge of a muddy clearing. A flash of tawny fur slumped among the yellowed grass. Lauren slowed, heart pounding. Even from a distance, she could see the animal was big, too big for a house cat. She dropped to one knee, squinting, and made out the spotted haunches, tufted ears, and short, thick tail. A bobcat, male by the look of the heavy shoulders and battered face. She crept closer, careful not to startle him, every step measured, boots nearly silent on the cold earth. The bobcat didn't bolt. That in itself was wrong. Instead, he lifted his head, eyes wide and gold, rimmed with a cloud of pain. His sides heaved with shallow, ragged breaths, mud clung to his flanks, and his hind legs splayed uselessly behind him, the fur around his hips matted with blood. Lauren scanned for signs of aggression, ears flat, tail twitching, a snarl, but none came. Instead, the animal stared right at her. Not with terror, not with the cold, predatory calculation she'd come to expect from wildcats. No, there was something else there. Something that hit her square in the chest. Was it hope? Desperation? It felt almost like trust. She crouched, lowering herself until she was eye level with the bobcat. He didn't move, didn't even flinch as she reached into her bag for latex gloves and a penlight. Her breath made soft clouds in the cold air. Somewhere a crow called, sharp and lonely. Lauren's mind raced with protocol. Wild, paralyzed bobcat. Likely spinal injury, maybe from a snare or a hit from a vehicle. Every rule said to keep her distance, make the call, and let nature take its course. The chances of survival, let alone rehabilitation, were almost non-existent. Still, she couldn't look away. "Hey, big guy," she murmured, her voice low and steady. "You're a fighter, huh?" The bobcat's whiskers twitched. His eyes never left hers, even as she inched closer, scanning for signs of shock. Pale gums, weak pulse, shallow respiration. She saw the cruel bite of a wire snare embedded around his lower back. The wound, angry and raw, she swallowed hard. It would be so much easier to turn away, to call it in, walk back to her truck, and let the state take care of it. But as she watched the bobcat struggle to breathe, she remembered her own brother, years ago, lost in these same woods after a fall. She remembered the helplessness, the feeling of being left behind. The bobcat blinked, and something in his gaze broke her resolve. Lauren made her choice. She slipped out of her heavy coat and draped it over his trembling body, careful not to touch the wound. The cat's breath shuddered, but he did not lash out. Instead, a low, guttural rumble vibrated from his chest. Not quite a purr, not quite a growl, something in between. She pressed her palm gently to his side, feeling the rise and fall of his ribs. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Time blurred. Lauren worked quickly, snapping the wire free with a pair of bolt cutters, flushing the wound with sterile water from her canteen. The bobcat barely moved, trusting her in a way she'd never seen before. She started an IV, her hands steady, but her mind spinning. She was breaking every rule. She was alone, miles from help, darkness falling faster than she'd planned. But when she looked down, she saw the bobcat's eyes, so clear, so full of life despite the pain. In that moment, Lauren knew she would do whatever it took, even if it cost her everything. Night in the pine woods arrived fast and cold, swallowing the light and replacing the easy quiet of dusk with a raw, hungry wind. By the time Dr. Lauren Mitchell had stabilized the bobcat as best she could, rinsing his wounds, splinting his lower back, covering him with her own coat, her hands shook not just from the dropping temperature, but from the weight of what she was about to do. Every guideline, every line in every training manual screamed that this was reckless. Wild, paralyzed bobcats didn't get second chances. The humane thing, the logical thing, was euthanasia. But logic had left her the minute she looked into Jasper's eyes. She named him Jasper right there on the forest floor. "You're not just a case number," she whispered. "You're Jasper, and I'm not leaving you." Her voice caught on the icy air. She dialed her satellite radio, heart hammering. Static fizzed. The night's silence shattered as she connected with Dr. Marcus Lee. Marcus was a seasoned wildlife surgeon, her closest friend, a voice of reason, and the only person she trusted to help her break the rules. "Marcus," she hissed, keeping her voice low, "I need you at the clinic. It's urgent. High-risk rescue. Prep the OR and don't ask. Just trust me." His answer was immediate. "You got it, Lauren, but you know what this means." She did. If the state found out she was intervening against protocols, her license was on the line. The Wildlife Center could be audited. But none of that mattered. Not now. "Yeah, I know. Just be ready." The forest had gone utterly still, even the wind holding its breath. Lauren stayed by Jasper's side, checking his vital signs, running her gloved hand gently over his battered flank. He tensed, but then, almost unbelievably, relaxed. He let her examine the gnarled wound where the snare had bitten in. Most wild bobcats would have lashed out, driven by pain or panic. Jasper did neither. His gaze followed her, alert, cautious, but never aggressive. She could feel his trust blooming, fragile but real, in the narrow space between survival and surrender. The temperature plummeted. Lauren's breath came in frosty bursts as she wrapped an emergency blanket around Jasper, pulling herself close to shield him from the wind. She could hear coyotes in the distance, howls echoing through the trees, hungry and bold. Her truck was a half-mile away, down a steep ravine and through a tangle of dark brush. Moving Jasper now would risk further injury. She had no choice. She would spend the night here with him, become his shield against the predators of the night. Every so often Jasper twitched, whether from pain, fear, or dreams, she couldn't tell. She whispered to him, soft words meant as much for her as for him. "You're not alone. I promise. Once he tried to drag himself up, powerful shoulders flexing in the cold earth, but his hindquarters refused to obey. He slumped, exhausted, breathing raggedly. Lauren made a small fire in a hollow, careful to keep it low and hidden from sight. She heated saline in a tin cup and used it to keep Jasper hydrated, feeding him water in tiny, careful sips. As the hours crawled by, she heard branches cracking in the distance. A bear, maybe, or a pair of raccoons investigating the smell of blood. But the fire, the scent of human sweat and fear, kept them at bay. When the stars appeared overhead, dazzling in their remoteness, Lauren pulled out her phone, opened a worn photo of her brother, and remembered the promise she'd made to never let another living thing die alone in these woods. She hummed softly, a tune from childhood, half lullaby, half prayer. To her shock, Jasper's ears flicked, and he pressed his head just slightly into her palm. She didn't know if it was gratitude or exhaustion, but it was enough. Hours bled into one another. Lauren fought off sleep, checking Jasper's pulse, massaging his paws to keep his blood circulating. She watched the rise and fall of his ribcage, willed him to keep breathing. Just before dawn, frost crusted the grass, and the air was bitter enough to sting her eyes. A pair of curious foxes watched from the edge of the trees, eyes like coins in the moonlight. At the first sign of daylight, she sprang into motion. She rigged a makeshift sled from a tarp and broken branches, bundling Jasper inside with layers of blankets and her own coat. He was barely conscious, but as she lifted him, he opened his eyes and, somehow, did not fight. She hauled him through the underbrush, legs burning, shoulders aching. Every step was a gamble. Every minute she expected the worst. A final breath, a sudden thrash, the sound of distant engines bringing authorities who would shut her down for good. She reached the truck just as the sun broke over the horizon, cold and gold through the pines. Jasper's breath fogged in the air as she loaded him gently into the back, her own muscles trembling from fatigue and relief. She slid behind the wheel, wiped blood and tears from her face, and gunned the engine to life. As she drove toward the wildlife center, the sky blazed with orange and pink. Lauren called Marcus again, this time her voice rough but determined. "We're coming in. Get the surgical suite ready. Jasper's alive." In the rearview mirror, she caught a glimpse of Jasper's face, filthy, battered, but eyes still shining. A wild animal, a lost cause, and yet... As the road twisted toward hope, Lauren felt something inside her shift. She didn't know if they'd make it, but she knew she would fight for him. Rules be damned. The ride to the wildlife center felt endless, the old Tacoma jostling over gravel as dawn bled pale light into the world. Every bump and jolt sent a tremor through the makeshift nest in Lauren's back seat, where Jasper lay bundled in her coat and blankets, eyes half-lidded but stubbornly conscious. He was breathing, shallow, labored, but steady. That single fact kept Lauren's panic at bay. She drove one-handed, the other reaching back at red lights to rest on Jasper's massive shoulder, as if her touch alone could keep his heart beating. The center was waking up when she arrived. Frost glistened on the chain-link fence and the bare branches of the cottonwoods. Lauren barely noticed the cold as she slammed the door and called for help, her voice hoarse and urgent. Two vet techs, faces wide-eyed with shock, rushed to help her lift Jasper out of the truck and onto a rolling stretcher. Inside, harsh fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The air smelled of disinfectant, wet fur, and the faintest whiff of fear. Marcus Lee met them in scrubs, his dark hair pulled back and his eyes scanning the Bobcat with a surgeon's detachment. "Spinal trauma?" he asked, voice clipped. Lauren nodded, holding back tears. "Snare injury, hind legs paralyzed. Infection risk is high. He made it through the night. Marcus's lips tightened. He and Lauren had patched up hawks with shattered wings, wolves with broken jaws. But wildcats, especially adults, almost never survived spinal injuries. And yet Jasper was alive, his head lifted just enough to meet Marcus's gaze, golden eyes wary but not wild. The team sprang into action. IV lines were inserted. Antibiotics and pain meds flooded Jasper's veins. His body was limp from the waist down, fur stained with dried blood and pine needles. But as Marcus pressed a stethoscope to Jasper's side, the bobcat's ear flicked. Tiny, but deliberate. "He's a fighter," Marcus murmured. But Lauren heard the warning underneath. The prognosis was grim. In the surgery suite, Marcus carefully examined Jasper's spine while Lauren cleaned his wounds. Shredded muscle and skin bore mute testimony to the agony of the snare, the nights spent dragging himself through the woods. Jasper endured every prod and needle without a single hiss. He watched Lauren, eyes steady and bright. She found herself whispering, "Stay with me, big guy, just a little longer." Outside the room, the staff whispered. Some were angry. "It's not right to put him through this," a young intern said, shaking her head. "It's cruel to make him fight for a life he can't have." Others just looked away. The rules were clear. Wild animals with spinal trauma should be euthanized, sparing them pain, keeping resources for those who could be released. Lauren heard every word. The pressure was immense. Her phone buzzed with messages from administrators. Explain the deviation from protocol. Prepare incident report. She ignored them all, her focus narrowing to the rhythm of Jasper's breathing, the rise and fall that was now her only anchor. Days blurred together. Jasper's prognosis hovered between dire and hopeless. His hind legs never moved. Infection raged through the wound. The rehab staff, exhausted and wary, began to urge Lauren to let him go. There were more animals coming in every day, each with a chance, however slim, at release. But Lauren couldn't forget the way Jasper had looked at her in the woods. She couldn't forget the feeling in her chest, the ache that went deeper than her own scars. She slept beside Jasper's cage at night, curled on a thin cot with a scratchy wool blanket. Sometimes, when the center was silent except for the hum of machines and the distant howl of wind, she sang softly. Old songs from childhood, half-remembered lullabies, bits of folk music her brother once loved. Her voice was rough, nothing beautiful, but the notes filled the dark. At first, Jasper ignored her, too weak or too proud to respond. But over the days, as Lauren made her rounds, she began to notice small changes. Jasper watched her constantly, his gaze following her across the room. When she sat beside his cage and sang, his ears would flick in rhythm to her voice, and once, just once, he let out a low, gravelly purr. One night, Lauren found herself telling Jasper her story. She told him about the accident in these same mountains that had taken her brother years ago. How she'd searched the forest for days, refusing to give up. How the loss had hollowed her, driving her to save every wild creature she could, even when the odds were impossible. "Maybe that's why I'm stubborn," she whispered to the sleeping bobcat. "Maybe that's why I can't let you go. I know what it feels like to be left behind." Jasper blinked slowly, his eyes reflecting the dull red of the nightlight. In his stillness, there was no judgment, only presence. In that moment, Lauren felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just fighting for Jasper. She was fighting for herself, for her brother, for all the times she'd refused to say goodbye. The staff grew restless, supplies dwindled, administrators demanded reports and explanations. But every time Lauren thought of giving up, she remembered Jasper's eyes on that forest floor. She remembered the plea, the trust that had passed between them in the pine-scented dark. And so, as the autumn days faded into winter, and the world outside grew sharper, colder. Lauren dug in. She refused to surrender. Night after night, she sang to Jasper and told him stories of hope and loss and the stubborn beauty of holding on. She didn't know if he understood. She only knew she had to try. Some battles were worth fighting, even when everyone else said the cause was lost. The first real snow fell heavy and wet, blanketing the world outside the wildlife center in a muffled, ghostly hush. Winter arrived in full force in northern Colorado. Gray skies, biting winds, and a sense that the whole world had gone into hibernation. For Lauren, the days and nights inside the center blended together, marked only by the routines of Jasper's care and the quiet moments she stole beside his cage. She'd settled into a rhythm, pouring her energy into every detail of Jasper's rehabilitation. She measured his temperature, checked the wound for infection, and coaxed him to eat small bites of venison and rabbit, blending them with a bit of warm broth. Every action was gentle and deliberate, performed with a care that bordered on obsession. Jasper watched her with those strange, intelligent eyes, never shrinking away, but never fully letting down his guard. Over time, Lauren began to notice the subtle signals that revealed the bobcat's moods and needs. When she entered the room, Jasper's tail would flick once, a low, cautious greeting. His ears swiveled to track her voice, especially when she spoke in that soft, steady tone he seemed to trust. She learned that a quick twitch of his left ear meant discomfort, while a slow blink was a sign of acceptance. When she reached through the cage to scratch the thick fur under his chin, he would sometimes close his eyes, as if savoring the moment. The rehab team was split. Some were moved by Lauren's devotion and Jasper's growing calm. Others shook their heads, muttering that it was wrong to humanize a wild bobcat. "He's not a pet, Lauren," warned Janet, the senior vet tech, her arms folded across her chest. "If he survives, he'll never be the same. You're setting yourself up for heartbreak, and maybe something worse." Lauren bristled, but kept her frustration hidden. "I know what I'm doing," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "He's not a pet. He's just trusting me. That's all." Doubt gnawed at her, especially in the lonely hours after midnight, when the center was silent except for the hum of heating vents and the soft, rhythmic breaths of animals sleeping in their enclosures. Was she doing the right thing? Was she risking too much for one animal when so many others needed her help? The questions circled in her mind, relentless and sharp. But every time she thought about giving up, Jasper would look at her with those eyes, steady, calm, a reminder of the moment in the woods when she'd chosen empathy over protocol. In those moments, her doubts quieted. One night, as a powerful winter storm battered the center, Lauren lay on her cot beside Jasper's cage, listening to the wind howl outside. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark electric blue. Thunder followed, rolling through the building like a distant avalanche. Jasper, usually stoic, began to cry, a deep, guttural sound of pain and fear that cut through Lauren's heart like a knife. She jumped to her feet and knelt beside the cage, reaching through the bars to stroke his head. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you." Her hand trembled, but her voice stayed steady. The storm raged, rattling the windows and shaking the old building to its foundation. Lauren stayed by Jasper's side, humming softly, telling him stories of the woods and her childhood and the brother she'd lost. She spoke until her throat ached, her words mingling with the sounds of thunder and rain. Slowly, Jasper's cries faded. He pressed his head against her hand, his body shuddering with each breath. For the first time since she'd found him, he purred, a low, rough vibration that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. Lauren felt tears sting her eyes. She realized in that moment that their healing was a two-way street. She was saving Jasper, but he was saving her too, forcing her to confront her own grief, her loneliness, her need for connection. By morning, the storm had passed. Snowdrifts piled against the windows, turning the world outside into a field of dazzling white. Jasper was exhausted, but alive. Lauren sat with him, her head resting against the cool metal of the cage, feeling a strange sense of peace. For the first time in months, her mind was quiet, but the outside world continued to intrude. The rehab center was under pressure, resources stretched thin, administrators asking for updates, donors wanting to know why so much time and effort were being spent on a single unlikely case. Some staff members grumbled openly, arguing that Lauren was crossing a line by getting too close. Still, Lauren refused to back down. She explained Jasper's progress, described the changes she saw in his behavior, and argued that his trust was a sign of something important, something worth fighting for. "He's not just surviving," she told the team one afternoon, her voice full of quiet conviction. "He's healing, and so am I." The days slipped by, each one a small victory in the long battle for hope. Lauren learned to trust her instincts, to read Jasper's subtle signals and respond with patience and compassion. Their bond deepened, built on countless hours of shared struggle and silent understanding. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains and cast long shadows across the snow, Lauren watched Jasper from her cot, her heart full of gratitude and awe. She realized that their journey was far from over. The odds were still against them, the road ahead uncertain. But for the first time, she believed that anything was possible. They would face whatever came together, one day at a time. By midwinter, word about Jasper had begun to seep beyond the wildlife center's snow-blanketed walls. The small-town rumor mill churned, stories about a bobcat too stubborn to die, a wildlife vet too stubborn to give up. Some called it foolishness, others called it compassion. But everyone agreed on one thing: nobody had ever seen anything like it before. Inside the center, the mood was tense. Jasper's infection had improved thanks to Lauren's relentless care, but his hind legs still refused to respond. The wound from the snare had closed, leaving a scar that ran like a jagged seam across his lower back, a permanent reminder of the night he almost died. Lauren spent hours every day massaging his legs, stretching his joints and moving his paws through water therapy. Some days his tail twitched a little. Most days, there was nothing. The staff grew impatient, questioning the logic of pouring time and resources into what many saw as a hopeless case. The breaking point came late one Friday afternoon, when Jasper's temperature spiked and he refused to eat. Lauren rushed blood samples to the lab, her nerves fraying as the numbers came back. A hidden abscess, a fresh wave of infection, and an urgent need for intervention. She called Marcus immediately, her voice trembling with urgency. "We're losing him," she said. "We have to operate tonight." Marcus hesitated for only a moment, then agreed. The decision meant risking Jasper's life on the table, but doing nothing meant letting him fade away. That night, as the rest of the world huddled indoors against the biting wind, Lauren and Marcus scrubbed in for surgery. Lauren's heart hammered with dread and hope as she stood by Jasper's side, her gloved hands shaking as she monitored his breathing. The surgical suite was quiet except for the beep of monitors and the hiss of the oxygen tank. Marcus worked with the steady hands of a craftsman, cleaning out the abscess, repairing tissue, and re-examining the spinal trauma. Every moment was a gamble. A single mistake could mean the end. Lauren watched, holding her breath as the hours crawled by. Sweat trickled down her spine, her mind racing with fear. Jasper's body, battered and scarred, somehow held on. After what felt like a lifetime, Marcus closed the final suture. "Now we wait," he said softly, peeling off his gloves. "There's nothing more we can do tonight." Lauren sat with Jasper in recovery, her hand resting on his massive paw. He looked impossibly small on the table, his sides rising and falling with shallow breaths. She whispered to him, the same lullabies and stories she'd shared during his darkest hours. "You've made it this far," she said, her voice cracking. "Don't let go now." Meanwhile, the outside world was taking notice. A volunteer at the center, moved by the sight of Lauren curled up with Jasper, snapped a photo. Jasper's head resting gently in Lauren's lap. Her eyes closed in exhaustion, but her hand still tangled in his fur. The image went viral overnight. Social media exploded with comments and shares. Donations poured in, along with messages of hope, encouragement, and, inevitably, controversy. Wildlife experts weighed in, some praising Lauren's dedication, others condemning her actions. "You're interfering with nature," one comment read, racking up thousands of likes. "A paralyzed bobcat should be put down, not pampered like a pet." Others shared stories of animals they'd rescued, lost, or fought for against impossible odds. The debate raged, dividing the community and drawing attention from animal lovers and critics far beyond Colorado. The flood of donations brought relief for the struggling center, funding new supplies and allowing Lauren to purchase specialized equipment for Jasper's care. But the spotlight came with a price. Local reporters began calling, eager for interviews. Some staff members grew resentful, feeling overshadowed by the sudden fame. Ranchers in town grumbled that Lauren was making a circus out of tragedy. Tension simmered beneath every conversation. Lauren tried to tune it all out, focusing on Jasper's slow recovery. Days passed in a blur of treatments, physical therapy, and endless monitoring. Each morning, Lauren braced herself for bad news, but Jasper clung to life, stubborn and silent. Then, one gray morning, as snow drifted against the windows, a miracle happened. Lauren was working Jasper's hind legs, gently massaging and flexing the muscles, when she felt it, a tiny twitch beneath her fingertips. She froze, hardly daring to breathe. Had she imagined it? She tried again, this time speaking softly to him. "Come on, Jasper. Show me you're still in there." As if in answer, his right leg twitched, then his left, a slight but unmistakable movement. Lauren gasped, tears springing to her eyes. She called Marcus and the rehab staff, her voice trembling with joy. "He moved!" she shouted. "He moved his legs!" The team rushed in, skeptical at first, but watched in awe as Jasper repeated the tiny movements, his muscles firing for the first time since his injury. The news spread like wildfire, shared across social media and picked up by local news. The same critics who had called for euthanasia now watched with reluctant respect, while supporters cheered the improbable progress. Jasper's story became a rallying point, a symbol of hope, resilience, and the power of compassion. That night, as the center settled into an uneasy quiet, Lauren sat beside Jasper's recovery pen, overcome by gratitude and exhaustion. She knew the road ahead would still be hard, full of setbacks and challenges. But for the first time, hope felt real, alive and fighting, just like Jasper himself. And in the darkness, as snow fell silently outside, Jasper lifted his head, eyes bright and unbroken. Against all odds, he was still here. And so was she. Spring thawed the ice from the edges of the world, the snow receding in slow patches of brown grass and glistening mud. For months, The Wildlife Center had been a fortress against the cold, a haven for lost and wounded creatures. But lately it felt like the whole town was watching, judging, waiting for the next chapter in Jasper's story. Inside the center, change was everywhere. The donation surge, sparked by Jasper's viral photos and progress videos, had transformed the rehab wing. The new therapy room gleamed with rubber mats, padded rails, and a hydrotherapy tank. Lauren stood in the center one chilly morning, her hands shaking as she clipped a gentle harness around Jasper's chest. The bobcat was alert, his eyes tracking her every movement. The muscle tone in his hind legs had improved. Every day, she'd seen slight tremors, tiny flexes, each one a rebellion against the fate everyone else had predicted. The rehab team gathered, cameras ready, hearts pounding with cautious hope. Lauren crouched beside Jasper, whispering encouragement. "Ready, big guy? Let's show them what you've got." With a deep breath, she slid her arm under his belly and gave gentle support as he pushed himself upright. For a moment, nothing happened. Just silence and the soft whir of a camera. Then Jasper's hind leg twitched, shifted, and took a trembling, uncertain step. His claws clicked against the mat. Another step, halting, awkward, but real. The room erupted with cheers, a wave of disbelief and joy breaking across the rehab staff. Lauren blinked back tears as Jasper leaned into her, drawing strength from her steady hand. A staff member filmed the moment, uploading it to the center's social pages with the caption, "Miracles happen. Jasper's first steps." Within hours, the video went viral. The world watched as the wild bobcat, once written off as hopeless, took his first uncertain steps toward recovery. News outlets picked up the story, requests for interviews poured in, and suddenly, Lauren found herself fielding calls from animal ethics panels, university researchers, and late-night talk shows. The attention was overwhelming, but it came with new complications. The Wildlife Center was flooded with visitors, school groups, curious locals, and animal rights activists eager to see the miracle bobcat. Some came bearing gifts and thank you notes, others with petitions and pointed questions about Jasper's future. Could he be released? Was he safe? Was Lauren playing God, keeping a predator alive against nature's will? Meanwhile, the local ranchers, whose cattle and chickens roamed the nearby hills, grew more vocal. At a community meeting, a tall man in a dusty Carhartt jacket stood up, his voice hard. "That cat gets out, and he'll be a problem. You want to risk our livestock for a publicity stunt?" The room was divided, some nodding in agreement, others crossing their arms, silent but thoughtful. Lauren tried to explain, her voice calm but passionate. "Jasper isn't a threat. He's still a wild animal, but he's teaching us more about healing and trust than any research paper ever could. We're monitoring him closely. No one wants a problem for your herds or families." Some ranchers listened. Others left, grumbling about city folks and their circus cats. Despite the tension, the center pushed forward. Lauren was invited to speak on animal emotions and the ethics of rescue. She found herself on stage at a local college, sharing Jasper's story, how a broken animal had shown an entire community the power of compassion, and how trust could bloom in the most unlikely places. In the midst of the public uproar, Lauren kept her focus on Jasper's recovery. They spent hours together in therapy, walking the length of the rehab room, venturing outside into a secure enclosure when the weather warmed. Jasper's steps grew steadier, his confidence building with every day. Still, Lauren watched him closely. He remained cautious, scanning the world with the alertness of a true survivor. His instincts were intact, but so was the bond between them. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. It was supposed to be a routine walk, just the two of them in the outdoor enclosure, the air scented with pine and new grass. Jasper walked beside Lauren, his steps slow but sure, when suddenly he stopped dead, ears perked, nose twitching. He stared into a thicket of brambles at the edge of the fence, then darted forward, surprising Lauren with his sudden urgency. She hurried after him, heart pounding. Jasper pressed his nose to a gap in the fence, then looked back at Lauren, eyes intense. She understood. He wanted her to follow. Climbing through the brush, Lauren slipped out into a wooded ravine that bordered the property, boots sinking into the mossy ground. Jasper kept pace beside her, leading her to a shadowy hollow beneath a fallen log. There, hidden by leaves and dirt, she found them. 3 tiny bobcat kittens, eyes barely open, mewling in hunger and fear. Their mother was gone, likely the victim of a poacher's trap, judging by the blood and human footprints nearby. The kittens were weak, shivering, too young to survive on their own. Lauren's breath caught. She glanced at Jasper, who stood over the kittens, his posture protective, tail swishing. The wildcat she'd saved had led her here, becoming a rescuer himself. The irony wasn't lost on her. Jasper was the last animal anyone expected to play guardian. But he crouched low, watching over the tiny orphans, every muscle tense and alert. Lauren gently scooped the kittens into her arms, wrapping them in her jacket. Jasper followed her back to the center, never straying far from her side. By nightfall, the story had already begun to spread. The miracle bobcat had saved more than himself. He'd saved a new generation, and in the depths of Lauren's heart, hope burned brighter than ever. Word about the bobcat kittens traveled even faster than Jasper's recovery had. By morning, the Wildlife Center was buzzing with a new kind of electricity. Excitement, fear, awe, and a surge of logistical challenges. News vans lined the gravel lot. Animal control officers arrived to document the scene, while volunteers prepped bottles of formula and warm towels for the tiny, trembling orphans. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of milk replacer, pine, and a strange hopefulness. Jasper watched it all from his large enclosure, his gaze never far from the basket where the kittens slept. He'd surprised everyone, not just by surviving, but by adopting a protective posture that none of the staff had ever witnessed from a wild adult bobcat. He lay near the mesh divider that separated him from the kitten's incubator. His ears perked at every squeak, his body tense whenever anyone new entered the room. Lauren took the lead, her days a blur of bottle feeding, vet checkups, and public interviews. The community's response was divided and loud. Some hailed Jasper as a miracle, a once feral predator turned guardian and proof that animals could heal in body and soul. Others, especially among the ranchers and some traditional wildlife managers, insisted Jasper had become too humanized, that his presence was a threat, that Lauren's compassion had gone too far. In staff meetings, the debates were just as heated. Janet, the senior vet tech, voiced the question on everyone's mind. What happens now? We can't release Jasper, not after all this. But if we keep him, are we doing him a favor or just creating another kind of cage? Lauren felt the weight of every decision. She'd grown as an advocate, emboldened by Jasper's journey and the story now unfolding with the kittens. She lobbied hard to keep Jasper as a wild ambassador, an animal whose life would bridge the gap between humans and the wilderness on the center's doorstep. He's teaching us, she argued, her voice ringing with conviction at a board meeting. He's teaching the world what's possible when we risk compassion. Let him stay. Let him help us teach the next generation. The battle lines formed quickly. A petition to keep Jasper at the center collected thousands of signatures online. but angry calls from local ranchers poured in as well. Some warned they'd pull funding if Jasper wasn't transferred to a sanctuary or, worse, euthanized. Old men at the diner grumbled about bobcats eating their chickens and city folks playing God. School kids sent handmade thank you cards, some with drawings of Jasper and the kittens napping side by side. Amidst the chaos, Jasper settled into his new role as guardian. Lauren arranged for the kittens to be moved into an adjoining enclosure. Safe, but close enough for Jasper to watch and, over time, interact through the mesh. When the smallest kitten, barely bigger than a squirrel, whimpered at night, Jasper would pace along the divider, chuffing softly, and sometimes the kittens would press their tiny noses against the mesh, as if seeking comfort from their silent protector. One afternoon, as the center buzzed with visitors, a group of children gathered at Jasper's window. Lauren stood with them, describing Jasper's journey and how he'd survived not only the cruelty of the snare but also the loneliness of recovery. A little girl with curly hair pressed her palm to the glass and whispered, "He's their new daddy." The words stuck with Lauren. She watched as Jasper, alert and poised, taught the kittens how to stalk toy mice and crouch in tall grass, a wildcat teaching wildness, with patience and gentleness no one could have expected. But not everyone was convinced. As Jasper's fame grew, so did the suspicion and anger among a vocal minority. Flyers appeared on the town's message board, wildcat or publicity stunt. Some activists demanded Jasper be relocated. Others accused the center of exploiting tragedy for donations. An anonymous tipster even called the State Wildlife Bureau, alleging Jasper's presence was a violation of release protocols. Lauren was called in for interviews with officials, forced to defend her every choice. The pressure felt endless. Yet for every critic, there were moments of validation. During one open day, a grizzled rancher who'd lost livestock to predators years ago watched Jasper through the fence. He listened as Lauren told the crowd about Jasper's patience with the kittens and how he'd led her to them instead of seeing them as prey. After a long silence, the man nodded and said, "Maybe he's not like the others. Maybe you're right to give him a chance." It wasn't acceptance from everyone, but it was a start. Behind the scenes, Lauren fought to keep the kittens healthy. Each one had its own personality. The boldest climbed the enclosure walls, the shyest hid in the soft hay, and watched Jasper with wide, admiring eyes. With each passing week, the kittens grew stronger, more agile, honing their wild instincts under Jasper's watchful eye. Jasper, once a symbol of suffering, was now the bridge between worlds. Wild and captive, animal and human, pain and healing. He was living proof that family could be chosen, that trust could cross even the deepest scars, and as the community's eyes turned toward the center, divided and hopeful, Lauren knew Jasper's story was far from over. The real battle was only just beginning. As spring deepened into summer, the energy at the Wildlife Center shifted from raw survival to cautious celebration. The bobcat kittens grew fast, their once tiny bodies filling out with muscle and the sleek, mottled coats of true wildcats. Lauren watched with pride and wonder as Jasper took on the role of teacher, patient, protective, and infinitely watchful. He'd been transformed by his ordeal, yet remained undeniably himself, wild, proud, but now tethered to something larger than his own survival. Every day, Lauren brought the kittens into the exercise enclosure, letting them practice their pouncing, stalking, and wrestling under Jasper's vigilant gaze. He would crouch low behind a patch of tall grass, ears flicking as he waited for the boldest kitten to sneak up behind him, only to whirl around with a gentle swipe that sent the whole litter tumbling in delight. The center staff documented these moments on video, and soon, Jasper's family hour became a favorite among the center's growing online following. For Lauren, these days were exhausting but rich. She balanced administrative battles, grant applications, and daily care with her growing responsibilities as a public advocate. The open days at the center, now drawing families from across the state, became a chance to educate the public not just about bobcats, but about the fragile web connecting all creatures, wild and human alike. She gave tours, spoke on local radio, and wrote op-eds in the town newspaper. If Jasper can learn to trust, if he can break through old instincts for the sake of others, maybe we can too, she told a group of skeptical ranchers one Saturday morning, her voice steady despite the familiar tension in the air. Some in the community were moved. They brought their children to watch Jasper and the kittens, listened to Lauren's talks about conservation and the dangers of illegal trapping, and even volunteered for weekend chores. One longtime rancher, whose opinion had been a weather vane for the whole town, surprised everyone by donating fence posts and labor to help expand the center's outdoor run. "I never thought I'd be helping a bobcat," he grumbled, "but you've made a believer out of me." Others remained suspicious or outright hostile. Online, anonymous critics accused Lauren of anthropomorphizing wild animals and warned that Jasper would never be safe outside captivity. A few still left angry voicemails, blaming every missing chicken or stray cat on the circus cats at the center. Lauren learned to take these attacks in stride, focusing on the impact she could see. Children laughing at Jasper's antics, the awe in visitors' eyes when a kitten scaled a log or mimicked Jasper's hunting crouch, and the gradual, grudging acceptance from some of the town's hardest skeptics. As the kittens grew stronger and wilder, Lauren faced a bittersweet reality. It was her duty, and Jasper's too, to prepare them for release. They needed to learn to hunt, to fear humans, to navigate the dangers of a world far less forgiving than their cozy nursery. With a mix of pride and heartbreak, Lauren watched Jasper lead them through practice hunts in the secure enclosure, stalking, hiding, ambushing their prey. Dead mice, feathers tied to string, even a mechanical toy that zipped through the grass like a rabbit. Jasper's discipline was remarkable. He tolerated no nonsense in the classroom, swatting the boldest kitten away from an easy meal or giving a low, rumbling chuff that sent the others scattering to try again. At night, he curled around them, cleaning their faces and ears with the rough tongue of a true father. Lauren sometimes caught him watching her through the mesh, and in his eyes she saw gratitude and a kind of understanding, an awareness that his role was changing, that soon he'd be left behind. The center became a model for compassionate rescue. Word of Jasper and the kittens reached far beyond Colorado, drawing visiting wildlife specialists and students eager to learn from Lauren's unconventional methods. With each open house, the staff shared Jasper's story, how compassion could bend the rules, how trust could build bridges, and how one wounded animal could change the lives of so many, animal and human alike. Yet, the tension never fully disappeared. At a heated town council meeting, a small group of ranchers called for stricter regulations on the center. "What happens when those kittens come back for livestock?" one demanded. Lauren stood her ground. "We're not just sending them out blind. They're tagged, they're trained, and we're working with the state to monitor them. But these animals aren't the enemy. They're part of this place, just like us." Her conviction and Jasper's gentle leadership began to win more hearts than it lost. Some local kids started fundraisers, selling bobcat-themed crafts to support the center. A high school art class painted a mural on the center's front gate, showing Jasper surrounded by pine trees, mountain peaks, and, most touchingly, a line of small kittens at his side. As summer waned and the kittens neared the age of release, the mood at the center grew tense and emotional. Lauren dreaded the coming day but took solace in the knowledge that they had done everything right. On the last evening before the planned release, Lauren sat in the enclosure, her knees hugged to her chest, watching Jasper and the kittens wrestle in the golden light. "You did good, buddy," she whispered. Jasper glanced her way, and just for a second, it seemed he smiled. She knew it was almost time to say goodbye. But Jasper's family, his legacy, was proof that hope, once sparked, could never truly be caged. The day of the release dawned sharp and blue, the mountains etched against the sky like the spines of ancient beasts. The air in the Wildlife Center was thick with anticipation and bittersweet dread. Staff moved quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile mood. The kittens, no longer kittens really, but sleek young bobcats with the bold muscles and wary eyes of wild-born predators, pushed restlessly at the doors of their enclosure. Jasper sat at his usual post beside the mesh, regal and silent, his eyes never leaving his adopted children. Lauren stood by the window, her hands trembling slightly as she poured warm broth into a cup. The past weeks had been a blur. Final health checks, practice hunts, tagging the young bobcats with discreet trackers, endless paperwork with state officials. Despite the community's divisions, there was a feeling in the air that something bigger was happening. A generational baton being passed, a chapter closing and another beginning. The center was crowded with visitors that morning, some familiar faces from the early days, others drawn by the story of Jasper and his miracle family. News crews clustered at the fence, cameras aimed at the release gate. Lauren barely noticed them. Her focus was on Jasper, who seemed both proud and impossibly old, his face marked by years of struggle, loss, and a love that had surprised everyone, maybe most of all himself. She kneeled by Jasper's enclosure, slipping her hand through the mesh one last time. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "They're ready because of you." Jasper pressed his head into her fingers, a rumbling purr deep in his chest. At noon, the gates were opened. The young bobcats hesitated for just a heartbeat before bursting through, racing into the wild in a blur of spotted fur and wild grace. They did not look back. Jasper watched them go, his tail twitching, eyes narrowed against the sunlight. For a long moment, the whole world seemed to pause. Visitors erupted into applause, but Lauren just watched, tears shining in her eyes. She thought of the journey, the night in the frozen woods, the rule-breaking rescue, the endless hours of care, the community arguments, the nights Jasper had comforted the kittens, and her too, through storms of pain and loneliness. All of it had led to this single, shining release. Jasper's health had been declining for weeks. The years and injuries had caught up with him, and Lauren knew, though she couldn't bear to speak it aloud, that his time was drawing to a close. He spent his days in the sunshine by the enclosure gate, watching the world beyond, ears flicking at every sound. The staff gave him extra treats and as much time outdoors as he wanted. Sometimes Lauren would sit beside him and talk quietly, sharing memories, hopes, and fears. The public's response to the kitten's release was immediate and powerful. Donations surged. People sent letters and emails, thanking Jasper for his courage and Lauren for her stubborn hope. Journalists flew in to interview Lauren, and national networks aired features on the story of the Bobcat Bridge, how one wounded animal had changed a town, a center, and, in some ways, the whole conversation about compassion and risk. But the most profound change happened closer to home. Local lawmakers, moved by the story and the outpouring of support, proposed new legislation to ban all snare traps in the region. The ranchers who had once fought Lauren's efforts now found themselves defending her choices at council meetings, telling anyone who would listen about the day they saw Jasper nurture orphaned kittens, or the way he watched over visitors with a mix of pride and curiosity. Even the most stubborn skeptics softened, if only a little, in the face of Jasper's legacy. As the weeks passed, Lauren watched Jasper slow down. His movements grew stiff, his appetite waned. Some mornings he would limp to the fence and stare into the woods, as if searching for the family he'd set free. Visitors noticed too. A young boy left a bouquet of wildflowers and a card that read, "Thank you, Jasper, for showing us how to be brave." In his final days, Jasper became a living symbol. Children sketched his portrait in chalk on the center's walkway. Teenagers launched a social media campaign for wildlife protection in his name. Teachers used his story as a lesson in empathy, resilience, and the power of showing up for someone, even or especially when it's hard. Lauren, feeling the weight of goodbye, struggled to find words to honor all Jasper had given. One afternoon, with the sun golden through the pine trees, she sat beside him in the grass, stroking his battered head. "You changed me," she said quietly. "You changed all of us. You turned this place into a family." Jasper's eyes flickered. He reached his paw through the grass, touching Lauren's hand with a gentleness that seemed to say everything words could not. In the center's final report for the year, Lauren wrote, "Jasper taught us that compassion is a risk worth taking, that trust can survive the deepest wounds, and that sometimes family is something we choose, not something we're given." His legacy lives on, not just in the bobcats who returned to the wild, but in every person who was brave enough to care. And so, as summer faded and the forest outside burned gold and red, Jasper's story became part of something bigger, living on in law, in legend, and in the wild hearts he'd helped set free. Jasper's final days were gentle, full of small, sunlit mercies. Lauren moved his bed to the enclosure's wide window so he could watch the shifting light play through the pines. Each morning, she would find him sitting quietly, golden eyes half closed, ears tuned to the far-off calls of the wild things he'd once hunted. The staff, sensing the moment, slowed down and found excuses to linger by Jasper's side. A quiet touch here, a whispered thank you there, all of them feeling the gravity of goodbye. It was Lauren who stayed longest, bringing her paperwork or a mug of tea to sit beside Jasper, her hand resting on his back. Sometimes she talked. Sometimes she simply listened to the rhythm of his breath, feeling the invisible thread that bound them together, woven through 1,000 moments of pain, hope, and stubborn courage. She could feel Jasper's spirit fading, but also shining, so alive in the impact he had made. The community, too, seemed to pause, as if everyone knew that something rare was coming to an end. Former critics left notes at the gate, words of gratitude, forgiveness, and sometimes apologies. Children brought wildflowers and painted rocks, laying them in a bright circle near Jasper's favorite sunspot. A local teacher organized a field trip so her class could see the legendary bobcat one last time. Standing behind the glass, the children whispered stories about Jasper's rescue, his kittens, and the day he'd led Lauren to the ravine. For a moment, every small hurt and old argument in town seemed less important. In those quiet days, Lauren found herself reflecting, not just on Jasper, but on the nature of trust and the meaning of family. She realized how much she'd changed, how her old wounds had started to heal, how she'd found belonging in the unlikeliest of companions, and how risking everything for a lost cause had given her a reason to hope again. She wrote late into the night, her journal filling with lessons Jasper had left behind. One evening, as the air cooled and dusk painted the sky in lavender and gold, Jasper let out a deep, contented sigh. and rested his head in Lauren's lap. She stroked his ears, humming the old lullaby she'd sung so many nights before, her voice trembling but sure. All at once, the years of struggle, the debates, the surgery, the lonely nights, the storms, seemed to gather and dissolve, leaving only the sweet clarity of this moment, a woman and a wildcat, each forever changed by the other. Jasper slipped away peacefully, surrounded by the people who had fought for him, cared for him, and learned from him. Lauren wept, but her tears were grateful, her grief softened by the knowledge that Jasper had lived a full, wild life, leaving behind a legacy that would ripple through the world long after his last breath. After Jasper's passing, the center transformed his enclosure into a memorial garden. Visitors left tokens of remembrance, drawings, feathers, and small wooden bobcats carved by local artists. The center's staff began to notice something remarkable. Whenever one of Jasper's kittens, now grown and thriving in the wild, passed near the center's edge, they would linger in the twilight, peering in through the fence as if searching for their old guardian. Lauren started to see these fleeting visits as more than coincidence, a sign that Jasper's lessons were being carried on, whispered in the language of wild things. Jasper's story reached further than anyone could have dreamed. The center became a model of compassionate rescue, attracting volunteers, scientists, and storytellers from across the country. Legislation inspired by Jasper's journey was passed not just in Colorado, but in neighboring states, banning cruel traps, expanding wildlife corridors, and funding humane education programs. Jasper's image, painted with pride and sorrow, appeared in murals and school textbooks. His story was retold on podcasts, in children's books, and at conservation conferences. Lauren herself was changed forever. She found a new strength in public speaking, her voice steady and wise as she spoke about Jasper's impact. "We learned," she told a packed auditorium one spring, "that true family isn't just blood or species. It's about who shows up, who risks something to care, who listens, who forgives." Jasper taught us that compassion is a kind of wild courage, and trust, once given, echoes far beyond one lifetime. As months slipped by, Lauren would often walk the edge of the pines at dusk, watching the shadows grow long. One evening, as the sun vanished behind the mountains and the first stars pricked the sky, she glimpsed a lone bobcat, larger than a kitten but younger than Jasper, slipping through the underbrush, pausing just long enough to meet her gaze. For a moment, the world seemed to hush, and Lauren felt Jasper's spirit lingering in the golden air, a silent thank you for everything, a reminder that every risk for love is worth it. She smiled, knowing she would never walk these woods alone again. Jasper's trust, his courage, and his wild, impossible hope lived on, not just in the bobcats who roamed free, but in every act of kindness, every second chance, and every heart brave enough to care. In the end, as the center lights glimmered through the trees and the calls of wild things echoed in the dusk, Jasper's story became a promise that one act of wild trust can echo for generations, turning even the most wounded among us into bridges between worlds. And in that promise, family and hope would always find a way home.